Welcome to The Debate. You know, when you live downstream from a massive hydroelectric dam, you rarely think about the millions of gallons of water pressing against that concrete every single second.
Right, yeah. You just expect your lights to turn on when you flip the switch.
Exactly.
And, you expect your basement to stay dry.
Yeah, the pressure is completely abstracted from your daily life because, well, the structure is doing its job, right? It's holding the deluge back. It's this invisible architecture.
And honestly, we like it that way. I mean, we want to focus on our own homes, our own neighborhoods, without waking up every morning worrying about the crushing weight of the reservoir upstream.
But eventually, the town council has to look at the maintenance bill for that dam. I mean, the concrete requires constant reinforcement. The engineers demand massive salaries. The monitoring systems, they constantly need upgrading.
Oh yeah, it is astronomically expensive.
Right, and suddenly the town is having a very serious, very profound argument about whether to keep paying for that concrete or, whether to let the water find its own level.
Are we paying too much for the concrete, or are we forgetting the crushing weight of the water waiting on the other side?
Exactly. Today, we're looking at America's role in the world and tackling a central question drawn from our source material. And that is, should the United States maintain an active leadership role abroad to deter global aggression, or should it pull back its military presence to save financial resources and address domestic crises?
It is the ultimate question of resource allocation, really. Do we find our security by managing the globe or by fortifying our own house?
To set the table for where we both stand, I will argue that active American leadership is essential for securing global trade, stopping invasions, and preventing nuclear proliferation. While you will argue that reducing overseas bases is necessary to avoid endless wars, force ally self-reliance, and redirect trillions toward urgent home front problems.
Yeah, that is exactly the dividing line here.
So I'll lay out my foundation first. From my perspective, a strong U.S. presence is a necessary, frankly, irreplaceable stabilizing force in an inherently chaotic world. When we look at the historical and empirical record, the material is clear. Active engagement stops hostile nations from invading weaker neighbors. Power abhors a vacuum.
Sure, but at what cost?
Well, if you remove American presence, you don't get organic peace. You get aggressive regional actors redrawing maps by force. Furthermore, it's U.S. Navy patrols that keep critical shipping lanes and global trade routes open.
Right.
And it's U.S. security guarantees that actively discourage our allies from building their own nuclear weapons. By anchoring this global system, this presence promotes democratic values and protects human rights worldwide. It really is the architecture of the modern world.
I absolutely understand the appeal of that architectural vision. It sounds incredibly noble, but I have to counter with the reality of what this actually costs us on the ground.
Okay.
America must pull back to save crucial financial resources. The material highlights a stark reality, The trillions of dollars we spend on foreign militaries and maintaining this global footprint could and absolutely should be redirected to fund domestic infrastructure and fix urgent crises right here at home.
But those two aren't mutually exclusive.
Wait, let me finish, because we are maintaining a global empire while our own bridges collapse. And beyond just the financial cost, there is a profound physical danger to this posture.
The physical danger?
Yes, maintaining a sprawling network of overseas bases raises the risk of accidental military conflicts, which historically drag us into endless wars. Pulling back isn't about isolationism. It's about forcing partner nations to pay for their own defense, encouraging necessary self-reliance, and, frankly, shedding a burden the American public can no longer bear.
Okay. Let's drill down into that physical danger you mentioned, because the core of my argument is that U.S. presence actively deters global aggression. It acts as both a psychological and physical barrier.
I hear you.
When a hostile nation looks across a border at a weaker neighbor, their cost-benefit analysis completely changes if American troops, however few, are stationed there. Without that presence, hostile nations are emboldened to invade.
I come at it from a different way. You look at troops on a border and see a shield. I look at those exact same troops and see a tripwire.
A tripwire? Explain the mechanics of a tripwire in this context.
Well, a tripwire force isn't designed to actually stop an invasion. If you put 500 or 1,000 U.S. troops in a highly volatile border region, they don't possess the tactical capability to repel a massive armored assault by a hostile neighbor.
Right, they're a deterrent, not the whole army.
But their entire strategic purpose is to die. If the adversary invades, American soldiers are killed, which legally, politically, and emotionally guarantees that the United States is instantly dragged into a massive war.
Well,
These overseas bases vastly increase the risk of accidental military conflicts. When you have U.S. forces sitting in every volatile flashpoint on the globe, any local skirmish, any miscalculation by a rogue general, any accidental airspace violation suddenly has the potential to trigger World War III.
but that's a hypothetical worst-case scenario.
We drag ourselves into endless wars not because our core national security was threatened, but simply because we were standing in the middle of someone else's historical grievance. Presence doesn't equal peace. It invites entanglement.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you're treating the presence of troops as the cause of the conflict rather than the deterrent. Think about a town's fire department.
Okay.
A fire department has trucks constantly patrolling, inspecting buildings, sitting in stations across every neighborhood. Their existence and their constant patrols don't cause the fires.
Right.
They prevent small sparks from burning down the entire neighborhood. If we remove the bases to avoid accidental conflict, aren't we virtually guaranteeing intentional invasions by hostile nations? Because you've just removed the one consequence they actually fear.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why that fire department analogy breaks down completely in geopolitics.
Go ahead.
A fire department isn't heavily armed. A fire department isn't perceived as a foreign occupier, and a fire department isn't inherently threatening to the neighboring town. When you place a military base on another nation's doorstep, you trigger what political scientists call the security dilemma.
Right, the idea that steps taken to increase your own security inherently decrease the security of others, provoking an arms race.
Exactly. It's a psychological feedback loop. You build a base on an adversary's border and say, "Don't worry, this is purely defensive. It's just a fire station." But the hostile nation looks at those bombers and tanks and views it as offensive.
Because they're naturally distrustful.
Right. They see it as a staging ground for an invasion. So out of fear, they build up their own forces in response. Then you see their build-up, panic, and add more troops. The tension spirals. You aren't preventing the fire. You are stacking dry kindling all around the neighborhood and hoping nobody drops a match.
I see the logic, but
And when the match drops, we are locked in because our, quote, credibility is on the line. Removing the tripwire doesn't guarantee intentional invasions. It forces regional powers to establish their own balance of power, creating a localized deterrence rather than an artificial American one.
that's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. I don't believe deterrence can be easily localized when the adversaries possess global reach. The vacuum gets filled by the most aggressive actor, not a peaceful balance.
Well, we can disagree on the outcome of that vacuum.
Let's look at the price tag of this global presence, because you brought up the idea that we are bankrupting ourselves.
We are. The bases aren't just sparking conflicts, they are draining us dry. I want to focus strictly on the math and the physical reality in American cities right now.
All right, let's talk math.
We are talking about trillions of dollars spent on foreign militaries and global posturing over the last several decades. This is not some abstract number on a congressional whiteboard. This represents a direct theft from domestic infrastructure.
Theft is a pretty strong word.
It is theft. Every billion spent maintaining a forward operating base halfway across the world is a billion not spent replacing lead water pipes in our cities, modernizing our failing power grids, or addressing urgent economic crises on the home front.
But those are separate budget items.
We have schools with failing roofs and an economy where millions are struggling to afford groceries, yet we act as the guarantor of security for incredibly wealthy nations. It is a gross misallocation of finite resources.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how those finite resources are generated in the first place. You are framing the military budget as a sunk cost, a total loss to the domestic economy.
Because it is.
But the global economy, upon which American prosperity actually relies, is entirely dependent on this spending. If you're listening to this in the Midwest, 1,000 miles from an ocean, you're probably wondering why you should care about a U.S. destroyer patrolling the Strait of Malacca.
Right, exactly. Why should a farmer in Iowa pay for a ship in the South China Sea?
Because of maritime insurance and the mechanics of global supply chains, 90% of the world's goods travel by sea. Specifically,
U.S. Navy patrols are what keep critical shipping lanes and trade routes open.
Okay, but
We secure the major choke points. If the U.S. Navy pulls out and a regional conflict breaks out or piracy surges, maritime insurance companies, the people at Lloyd's of London who underwrite these massive cargo ships, will instantly spike their premiums because the risk of a ship sinking just skyrocketed.
and those costs get passed down.
Immediately. The shipping company charges more to move the cargo, the manufacturer charges more for the goods, and suddenly the price of everything at your local Target or Walmart doubles.
So it's an inflation hedge.
Because the U.S. Navy guarantees freedom of navigation, maritime insurance premiums stay low, goods move freely, and global supply chains function efficiently. The American consumer, the American manufacturer, and the American taxpayer benefit directly from this invisible architecture.
I see, so I have to challenge your math here. If we pull back the Navy and trade routes close, wouldn't the resulting inflation and collapse in global trade completely wipe out the financial resources you're hoping to save for domestic infrastructure?
Wow, that is a fascinating way to defend a $1 trillion expenditure, essentially calling it a mandatory global tax for cheap flat-screen televisions and supply chain efficiency.
It's not just televisions. I mean, it's energy, it's medicine, it's agricultural exports. I acknowledge the interconnectedness of trade, but let's examine the underlying premise here, that if the U.S. Navy pulls back, the oceans suddenly become a pirate-infested wasteland and global trade immediately collapses.
It's highly likely.
That is a false binary. The global economy is incredibly resilient, and other nations have a massive vested interest in keeping those lanes open. If the U.S. stops subsidizing the security of international shipping lanes, what actually happens?
We see a disruption.
No, the nations whose economies depend most heavily on those specific routes, say regional powers in Asia or Europe, will step up to secure their own waters. They have navies. They have the economic incentive to keep the straits open. We are currently paying the premium for a service that the rest of the world would provide for themselves if we just stopped doing it for free.
But you're assuming a clean handoff. That transition wouldn't be seamless. It would be incredibly chaotic.
Transitions always have friction.
You're talking about multiple regional powers suddenly expanding their navies and jockeying for control over vital choke points. That doesn't sound like stability. That sounds like the prelude to a naval arms race.
Or just burden sharing?
And as we know, markets hate uncertainty. The cost of borrowing would skyrocket, supply chains would fracture into regional blocks, and the inflation we would see at home during that quote-unquote transition period would make the cost of our current defense budget look like an absolute bargain.
We are already experiencing massive economic uncertainty and inflation at home precisely because we are overextended. You are terrified of a hypothetical shock to the global supply chain, but I am looking at the actual present-day decay of our domestic foundation.
It's all connected, though.
We cannot project strength abroad if we are rotting from the inside. The priority has to be urgent home front problems. If we don't fix the economic and social crises here, we won't have the industrial base, the educated workforce, or the social cohesion to project power anywhere, Navy or no Navy.
I concede that the domestic burden is heavy, and it's a valid concern that our internal decay threatens our external capabilities. But if we follow your logic, if we pull back and demand this economic efficiency, we have to look at what happens to the defense strategies of the nations that have depended on us for 3/4 of a century.
Yeah.
You mentioned other nations stepping up.
Yes, which is long overdue. The current system practically mandates free riding. For decades, incredibly wealthy partner nations have deliberately underfunded their own militaries because they knew the American taxpayer would foot the bill for their defense.
They focused on economic growth, yes.
Forcing partner nations to pay for their own defense encourages necessary ally self-reliance and significantly reduces the U.S. burden. It is, fundamentally, a necessary market correction for global security. It forces nations to take their own regional diplomacy seriously because they can no longer just hide behind the American shield and hurl insults at their neighbors.
But you are ignoring what the American shield actually prevents. Yes, they underfund their conventional militaries. But more importantly, they underfund their unconventional militaries.
Unconventional?
U.S. security guarantees, specifically our extended deterrence, often called the nuclear umbrella, are exactly what prevent nuclear proliferation.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that umbrella for a second, because I think it's often misunderstood.
Sure. Extended deterrence is essentially a promise. We put a protective umbrella over an ally and tell their hostile nuclear-armed neighbor, if you drop a nuclear weapon on them, we will drop a nuclear weapon on you.
Right.
Because of that guarantee, several advanced, incredibly wealthy nations who have the technological capability to build a nuclear weapon in a matter of months choose not to. We are effectively buying their non-nuclear status with our security guarantees.
I follow.
So I have to point out a severe contradiction in your framework. You want partner nations to be entirely self-reliant for their defense against hostile nations. But if we fold up that nuclear umbrella and withdraw our security guarantees, aren't we essentially forcing those allies to build their own nuclear weapons to ensure their survival?
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered that a multipolar world, even a multipolar nuclear world, might actually be the logical endpoint of sovereign self-reliance?
Wait, really?
Now, let me be perfectly clear. I am not advocating for nuclear proliferation. Nobody wants more nuclear weapons. But the argument that America must forever bankrupt itself acting as the global policeman just to prevent sovereign nations from defending themselves with the ultimate deterrent is, well, it's a hostage situation. We are holding our own domestic economy hostage to the fear of what other countries might do.
It's a very rational fear, though.
Is it? Let's look at the reality of building a nuclear program. Most nations don't want them. The idea that a U.S. withdrawal immediately triggers a dozen new nuclear states assumes a level of panic that ignores how geopolitics actually works.
How so?
Developing a nuclear arsenal makes you an international pariah. It invites crushing economic sanctions, and it is astronomically expensive. If we pull back, these wealthy allies are far more likely to invest heavily in robust conventional defenses, better missile defense systems, larger standing armies, stronger regional alliances.
They'll still feel vulnerable.
They aren't going to just instantly sprint for a nuke. The transition to self-reliance doesn't have to mean nuclear apocalypse. It just means a localized balance of power.
It doesn't assume panic. It assumes rational self-interest. Let's look at the mechanics of state survival. If I am a mid-sized nation bordering a massive, aggressive nuclear power, and the United States packs up its bases and goes home to fix its water pipes, conventional defense isn't going to save me.
It's a grim view.
1 million troops can't stop a tactical nuclear strike. My only rational choice for ultimate state survival is to enrich uranium, and here is the mechanism of proliferation. Once I do it, my regional rival has to do it. Then their neighbor has to do it.
The domino theory.
The cascade effect is real, and the source material indicates that our engagement actively stops this cascade. Promoting democratic values and protecting human rights requires a world that isn't balanced on a knife edge of a dozen competing nuclear arsenals.
But we can't manage all of them forever?
By maintaining our leadership role, we limit the spread of the most destructive weapons ever created. That alone, regardless of the financial cost, justifies the investment.
And my response is that you cannot buy global perfection with American debt. The pursuit of this flawless, perfectly managed global system is exactly what leads to the overextension that destroys great powers throughout history.
I wouldn't call it perfection, just stability.
You say we are limiting the spread of destructive weapons, but in the process, we are maintaining a tripwire posture that raises the risk of conventional conflicts that kill thousands. We must prioritize. A nation's first duty, its absolute paramount obligation, is to the well-being, the economic security, and the safety of its own citizens.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today, and I think we've really cracked open the mechanics of how this global system operates.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex web.
So to summarize our positions in light of this discussion, my perspective remains that American leadership, while undeniably costly and incredibly complex, is the foundational architecture of the modern era. It is the structure that deters aggression by putting physical barriers in the way of hostile actors. It secures international trade routes that keep our domestic economy afloat. It limits nuclear proliferation by extending our umbrella, and it protects global democratic institutions. The cost of maintenance is high, but the cost of collapse would be catastrophic.
And my summary is that the immense financial toll of maintaining this global military apparatus is fundamentally unsustainable. We are borrowing against our future to police other people's borders.
Right.
Stepping back is the only rational way to avoid accidental, endless wars triggered by tripwire forces, to force our wealthy allies to finally pay their fair share, and to fundamentally address the urgent economic and social crises that are hollowing out our country here at home.
Yet, despite our profound differences on the policy prescriptions, I think we both acknowledge that the current system requires a delicate balancing act. You made a very fair point that we cannot project strength from a rotting foundation.
Thank you. Yes.
We both see that the health of the domestic economy is intrinsically tied to global stability. You can't have a thriving Main Street in a world engulfed in flames, nor can you project strength globally with a shattered economy at home.
Absolutely. The disagreement isn't about whether we want peace or prosperity. The disagreement lies entirely in where to allocate finite resources to best achieve that stability. It's a debate about the ratio of inward focus to outward focus.
Exactly. Grand strategy is incredibly complex, and there are profound, agonizing trade-offs between leading abroad and rebuilding at home. The tension between domestic prosperity and international security is a dilemma that will define our generation.
It really will.
There is much more to explore in the material we've discussed today to understand these mechanics, and we encourage everyone to dive into the source text to see how these theories play out in real time.
It ultimately forces us to ask what we value most and what price we are willing to pay for it.
So, to leave you with a final thought, the next time you look at that massive hydroelectric dam holding back the reservoir, ask yourself, is the true danger the exorbitant cost of the concrete or the crushing weight of the water waiting on the other side? Thank you for joining us on The Debate.